So the talk is called Protest Movements and Cultural Policies in Today's Russia. You probably have heard about what we call protest movements in today's Russia. This is quite a recent development. It's about 1.5 years old only, and therefore it is often compared to other global developments of the same kind, like the so-called Arab Spring in the Middle East or the Occupy movement in Western Europe. And although there are tiny similarities between the three, but generally speaking, what's happening in Russia, in my humble opinion, is completely different from what you have in other countries of the world in terms of protest movement. In order to understand why we have this protest movement and what is the nature of this movement, we'll have to go back a little bit, back to the Soviet times. Yes, by the way, this is my Occupy t-shirt. Occupy Abay, we used to have, instead of Wall Street, we've had a little monument to Kazakh poet in Chistые пруды and in Moscow. So this is a t-shirt from our protest rallies in Chistые пруды in the center of Moscow around this monument. Well, of course, they've been kicked out by the police after maybe 2 weeks of nice swinging sessions in Chistые пруды. With interesting lectures, even theater performances, let alone songs sang to a guitar. So, you know that before 1991 there was a country called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It is unanimously believed, especially in America, that the Soviet Union has been an awful country, a horrible, totalitarian, monstrous state which everyone hated. And this, of course, is not really so. This was a monstrous country, and it was undoubtedly totalitarian, but there's been some nice little things in the Soviet Union that a lot of people enjoyed them and feel very nostalgic about them even today. First of all, Soviet Union has been a superpower. And being a superpower is, of course, slightly different from not being a superpower, and you in America must understand this. A lot of Russian people said that, I'm ready to starve, but I want the rest of the world to be scared of us. And this was the psychology of superpower, which gave even the most miserable people of the country, this feeling, this sensation of them being very important because, we can push the red button and there will be no Holland, no Australia, or nobody in general. Except for us, because the country is so big and we can hide somewhere in the middle of Siberia. But this wasn't the only beautiful feature of the Soviet Union. Another one was that the country was relatively safe, not for the dissidents, of course, but generally speaking, quite safe, and exceptionally cheap. I remember not working, not doing anything in the Soviet Union, but not only living very interesting, adventurous life, but even traveling to Leningrad, to the Baltic states, and so on, because everything was like nothing in the old Soviet Union. Generally speaking, Soviet Union was a country which which was very benevolent and kind of nice and comfortable for those people who don't want to take chances. Because a lot of things in the Soviet Union have been guaranteed. I mean, in one popular rock song, they sang that we live in such misery, but this misery is guaranteed. It was guaranteed that people will never fall below a certain level. That people will always have work, because people who didn't work, they were called tuniyace, and they will simply put to jail for not working. Like I always didn't want to work, and therefore I had to, to take all kinds of tricks just in order not to work. And the same has been performed by most of my friends who had formal works of janitors, of some, night watchers, whatever. But in reality, they simply didn't want to work at all. They wanted, to have fun. They wanted to write songs. They wanted, to meet their friends. They wanted to hitchhike. They didn't want to work. And it was very difficult to do in the Soviet Union. But the majority of people, they didn't have these problems like we had. And they've been very happy of not working, but still, getting their salaries and living more or less okay. Of course, Soviet Union has been hell for enterprising people, for people who wanted, to take chances, for people who wanted to travel abroad, for people, who wanted more than the Soviet Union could give them. But they were a minority. So when the Soviet Union ceased to exist, there's an American book with a funny name. It seemed to be forever, but then suddenly was no more. Yes? Alexei Yurchak, I think, from Berkeley wrote it. Haven't read the book, but really love the title. So when it was no more, we have entered the so-called 1990s, which are usually nicknamed Likhie 90, the wild or the freewheeling or the crazy 1990s in now Russia, because the Soviet Union, of course, was now a part of history. And the 1990s, in a way, they've been a complete opposite of the Soviet system, which was quite logical, quite well built. The 1990s have been absolutely illogical, chaotic, anarchic, very free, very unsafe. The 1990s gave a lot of opportunities for those people who wanted to do something. So a lot of people made their billions. A lot of people finished the 1990s with a bullet through their heads. But anyway, they've had an interesting life in the 1990s where they could try a lot of everything. But again, these people, the enterprising people, they were a minority. They were a tiny minority, and the huge majority of people, they feel totally neglected. They feel they've been robbed. They feel like, they used to have something and now they had nothing. All their savings went down the drain. And of course, a lot of them also lost their work. And this was not only the peasants or the working class drunkards. They were like, the university professors, scientists, and very well educated, intelligent people, with big demands and taste for good life. And of course, the symbol of the 90s was Mr. Yeltsin himself, who in a way epitomized, the whole decade, because, one day he was a hero, another day he was lying in a ditch being completely drunk. There were some nice things about Yeltsin, like, he did have some sacred cows which were good, like he really did respect the freedom of press. And he really did respect the freedom of enterprise. So generally speaking, he didn't want to look as a tyrant or act as a tyrant, although sometimes he did. But at the same time, of course, he has built a regime which didn't favor 95% of the population of the country. And the population became terribly frustrated, and they said, to hell with freedom, we don't need this freedom, this is not freedom, this is bloody anarchy. And we want, law and order, and we want a firm hand back at work. And probably Yeltsin's greatest mistake was that he has handpicked this firm hand and asked a guy named Vladimir Putin, a former chief of the KGB club in the city of Dresden in the GDR, German Democratic Republic, who later worked at the city administration of St. Petersburg as the head of foreign trade, which of course was and always have been in Russia the most corrupted position one could get. And Mr. Putin became the president of Russian Federation in the year 2000, elected by the people, who didn't have much choice then. And needless to say that Vladimir Putin has been very lucky in some ways. By the way, he is very superstitious. He believes in voodoo and all those things. And it looks like he has some reasons to believe in it because there really was some voodoo working for Mr. Putin. One of the magic spells that worked for him is the fact that the oil prices, which were tremendously low throughout the 90s, I think the average price for the barrel of oil in the 1990s was $20. Now, in the notes or zeros, how do you call нулевые notes? 2000s? Okay. I'd rather call them zeros because this was a lost decade in every respect. So in the zeros, the oil prices went up to $150, and the average oil price was more than $100, which is 5-6 times more than in the previous decade. Another lucky thing for Vladimir Putin is that 9/11 happened in the United States of America, and America became fully preoccupied with war with terrorism, with fighting with Muslim fundamentalists and so on. So they could turn blind eye on what's going on in Russia. Russia was suddenly outside of interest of the global watchdog for human rights, freedom, and democracy. They were now much more interested in long-bearded guys from God knows where, and of course this was also very good for Mr. Putin because his hands were untied. Given all this, Vladimir Putin has signed a kind of a pact with Russian society. Of course, this pact has never been formulated nor actually signed, but it did exist, and it existed quite successfully for almost 10 years. And the formula of this pact has been very simple. It was that we, the authorities of Russia, the government, and me, Mr. Putin, as the president who can guarantee all this, we give you some stability in your material life. You can buy your Toyota cars, you can go on holidays in Egypt, you can live more or less okay. And that's guaranteed. In return, you support, or not really support, you simply ignore, you don't mind what we at the top are doing. And you turn blind eye on a carnival of theft and corruption that we are going to celebrate from now on. And the people of Russia said, yes, that's fine with us. And given the high oil prices, that was really okay, because although, 80 or 90% of all those incredible oil and gas billions of dollars have been put straight into the pockets of Mr. Putin himself and his closest friends, even the remaining 10 or 20%, остатки с барского стола, those little bits and pieces from the rich table of the new Russian nomenclatura, even this was enough for tens of millions of Russians to live relatively well. In any case, much better than they lived under Yeltsin. So this was actually, the reason why Putin became quite popular, despite being ugly, totally uncharismatic, KGB, and so on. I mean, I personally couldn't understand this. This is, a typical case of загадочная русская душа, the mysterious Russian soul. I mean, I simply can't understand how men, and especially women, can not be sick and vomiting when simply looking at this rat-like creature. But this was the fact. By the way, in a way, this pact was a part of a global trend. There is a very good book by an English politologist named John Kampfner called Freedom for Sale. And this book researches a global phenomenon of how in different countries in the 90s, and especially those zeros, people sacrificed part of their freedoms for the sake of stability, of material comfort, and especially security. Well, of course, he gives countries like Singapore as the typical example of a non-democratic country, but where everyone is happy. But even in the countries like the United States of America, after 9/11, the citizens have voluntarily sacrificed some of their rights for the sake of security. So in a way, what was happening in Russia was a global trend, but still it hasn't lasted long. And by the year 2008, the pact visibly started to crumble. Partly this has happened because of the financial crisis of 2008, but only partly, because there's been some other trends which led to the collapse of this happy zero life in the first decade of the 2000s. And those trends, they happened from both sides. From the side of the authorities, what was happening is the growing bespredel. You know, bespredel is a nice Russian word which means unlimitlessness. Unlimitlessness. Unlimitlessness means that the authorities have lost their shame completely and are doing things which are simply incredible and unprecedented. And this was what was happening in Russia, where the degree of theft and corruption and violence and general, you know, shamelessness became, you know, such that, you know, people started to think of the Soviet Union as a democratic, clean, nice, and people-friendly country. By the way, I forgot one important thing. When I was talking about this pact, I also meant to say that this was a universal agreement, which also applied for even the most kind of exotic and advanced parts of the population, like the business elite and the cultural elite. For the business elite, the rule once formulated by Mr. Putin himself at a meeting with the country's oligarch was «пиздить, но не пиздить». This phrase sounds a bit rude in Russia, but it's translated in a very nice way and means you can grab as much as you want, but you must keep your mouth shut. You know, those who didn't obey this order started to have trouble, and here, of course, the classic example is one Mikhail Borisovich Khodorkovsky, who was the richest person in Russia and was running the most successful and, what's interesting, the most transparent oil company in the country, and indeed he was grabbing a lot, no question about that. But he was also, well, he was a bit too noisy. He was supporting oppositional parties. He has created some social youth movements in the towns, you know, in the oil and towns which his company literally owned. So he was, and you know, what's the worst thing, and of course this was also the part with the pact with Russian bourgeoisie, is that the oligarchs, the capitalists of Russia, they must share their profits with me, Mr. Putin, and my circle at first notice, and at the amounts that we tell you. And this is, by the way, how Russian so-called oligarchs live up until now, when they're having, you know, those Winter Olympic Games at Sochi, which now cost more than all previous, I don't know how many, 30 or 40 Winter Olympic Games put together. And this is really so. I mean, this is not an exaggeration. The Sochi Olympics cost more than all Winter Olympic Games from 1924 till Vancouver in 2010. more than they all put together. And of course, it's not easy for our people-loving state, to spend only the money from the state budget on these Olympics. So they tell, Lukoil, Sberbank, Alfa Bank, whatever, big Russian companies, how many billions to donate, to the Olympic Games. This is how Russian capitalism works. So, of course, you know that Mr. Khodorkovsky has been jailed and is in jail still up until now. And this lesson has been very well learned by the oligarchs, by Russian entrepreneurs who remained free. So now they all obey and do what they are told to do by the authorities. The same kind of pact has also been signed with the cultural elite. In this particular case, it has been formulated in a way that you can do whatever you want. There's no censorship. There's nothing. You can put as much sex and drugs and violence and whatever into your films and plays and books and so on. You can stage any kinds of formalistic experiments. So you are free to create, with one little exception. There is, like in the fairy tale about the bluebird, yes? There is one little door in our castle where you are not allowed to go. And of course, this little door was called politics. So you can, you can do whatever, but never touch upon the political issues. Never question the legitimacy, the quality, the democratic and freedom-loving nature of our regime. This was the condition. And this condition has been blindly followed by 99.9% of the famous Russian cultural workers. Film directors, actors, writers, musicians, and so on. Some of them have been taken even closer to the heart of Mr. Putin and his regime, because they were given all kinds of privileges. The cultural privileges in Russia, which is still in many ways a non-market driven culture, is all kinds of state subsidies, then access to TV, which in Russia is tremendously important. I will tell a little bit more about that later. Or even such a thing called корпоративы. This is something that people outside of Russia simply don't believe, especially the professionals, say, in music business. But if you consider, say, the Russian music scene, one can say that 90% of the profits of biggest Russian pop stars, they don't come from selling records, they don't come from authors' royalties or selling merchandise, or even they don't come from public concerts, from ticket sales. 90% of the profits of Nikolai Baskov, Philippe Kirkorov, Alla Pugacheva, whatever, all those shitheads. Their profits come from closed invitation-only parties, which we call корпоративы, corporate parties. Корпоративы, заказники, banquets, whatever. And it's a unique thing to Russia. It doesn't happen anywhere else, maybe in Kazakhstan as well. But that's it. Since there's a plenty of crazy money in Russia, our elite, can allow themselves to throw enormous amount of very rich, very expensive parties. Of course, it's all the New Year and Christmas parties, it's all kinds of jubilees, it's all kinds of presentations, all kinds of everything, finishing with weddings, funerals, and birthday parties, where, by the way, also a lot of Western top stars perform. Like I once had a story told me by one Anatoly Chubais about how he and 13 other guests have been at a Moscow restaurant where an uncompromising American rapper nicknamed Eminem performed to 13 Russian oligarchs. I don't know how much money did he get for it. Certainly much more than he usually gets, for public performances. The same, the same with also many Western film stars, like you probably know about Gérard Depardieu, the French guy who now even became a Russian citizen, after he understood that all the money for him are in Russia, not in his native France, where he only pays enormous taxes. But girls like Sharon Stone, she is always at Russian birthday parties, kissing and taking photos with oligarchs' wives and daughters. So this is actually an enormous source of income for the creative, the beautiful, and the famous. But this is also a privilege, because if you are not loyal, you will never be invited to perform at a corporate party, because the corporate parties are always organized in a way that they invite, on one hand, they of course invite the members of the corporation, or the family, or the clan, or whatever. Then they invite the entertainers, but then, and this is the most important thing, they also invite people from the president's administration, from the government, from the FSB or KGB or whatever, to please them and to entertain them. And of course, if some of the entertainers are not 100% loyal and approved by our high censorship, of course, it will be a total failure instead of a nice party. Like there are also popular MCs for these corporate parties, and I used to be one of them a long time ago. And for me, this also has been a very important source of income. But after I became a political activist, so for 2 years, not not a single ceremony. You know, the biggest victim of this is a girl named Ksenia Sobchak, who was a very popular TV presenter and the queen of corporativy. I mean, she was making literally millions of dollars emceeing and conducting, you know, all those ceremonies, all those parties, presentations, and so on. So now she has to go to Kazakhstan all the time, you know, in order to support some cash flow in her personal life. Because she also, you know, dared, you know, to become an opposition figure. So this was still a story of the zeros, and but I've started to tell, you know, how this whole pact, how this whole Putin's paradise started to get lost a little bit. So on one hand, the authorities got completely out of control with their unlimited theft and corruption. On the other hand, we've started to gain some momentum on the opposite side, on the right, on the good side of the society. And here I could maybe name two trends. Trend number one is the fact that more and more Russian people became well-educated, well-traveled, more kind of global cosmopolitan, more understanding about what is really going on in the modern world, you know, and what 21st century is about. And these guys, a lot of whom, you know, speak foreign languages, got their MBAs, you know, whatever, they simply started to feel increasingly incompatible with what was going on in their own country. Which doesn't necessarily mean that this was an ideological or political incompatibility. In fact, it could have nothing to do with politics. You know, they didn't really care about politics, but they wanted to make their career, they wanted to do their business, they wanted, you know, to raise their children in a nice way and so on. And constantly they have encountered all kinds of awful things that are typical for the Putin's regime. I mean, they've started their business, and immediately there were, you know, people, you know, from the tax office, from the police office, from the, you know, fire brigade, and so on, extorting money from them. So they couldn't go on with this business. They've put their children at school, and then find out that there are drug dealers all over the school. And when they started to protest against these drug dealers, they found out that all those drug dealers are actually covered by the local police. They wanted, you know, to make career, they wanted to have an education, and they saw that without bribery, without, you know, all kinds of dirty compromises, they can't do anything. And of course, these people started to get a little frustrated. And we've started to have what is usually called a civil society. I think in America it's called on the grassroots level, because of course we had our political opposition, of which I'm not have a very high opinion, but we've started to have an opposition in face of normal people who whose everyday life forced them to fight the regime, to find this dishonest, corrupted, and violent environment. I will simply give you a few funny examples of what these civil movements looked like and with what they've been motivated. One is a movement called "Синие ведерки," blue buckets, which is basically against an absolutely medieval practice in Russia, where every boss, every head of the department in the government, let alone president's administration, ministries, and so on, they have cars with blue lights on their roof, and they can drive however they want. They overspeed. They park. They're parking anywhere they want, creating huge traffic jams. If it's a big boss, then whole streets and big avenues are simply closed for 30, 40, 50 minutes, for 1 hour. Huge streets in Moscow are closed, and thousands, maybe tens of thousands of cars are just standing there still, waiting before a motorcade of Putin, Medvedev, or even some smaller bosses will pass at 150 miles per hour. So this movement, Blue Buckets, they started to protest about this. And it was basically about traffic, not about politics or ideology or parties, but it did have something with human rights, because I think that such things, it really is very medieval. It's like there's some prince with his guards on horses driving in the middle of small medieval town, just pushing aside all the peasants and pushing them into dirt. So this is exactly the modern Russian way of how our bosses treat the people. Another popular civil movement is about drugs. I've already told you, that the biggest drug dealer in Russia is the police and the State Committee for Drug Control. So they've started several little organizations of civil activists, to fight drugs, to help drug addicts, to get the drugs out of the schools and so on. Maybe the most visible, the most sound of all those civil movements were environmental movements, and among them the most well-known is the movement to protect the Khimki forest. The Khimki forest is quite a big forest just outside of Moscow, and it's been, a beautiful forest with, ancient trees and so on, oaks, which at a certain period of time became doomed because they started to build a highway through this forest. And an interesting thing, by the way, is that the main developer of this highway, it's actually a highway from Moscow to St. Petersburg, is a guy named Arkady Rotenberg, who is now one of the richest persons in Russia and who is the personal judo trainer of Mr. Putin. So he has no education, no nothing, no MBA or whatever. But he constantly shake hands and rub shoulders with Mr. Putin on a tatami, and now he's worth I don't know how many billions of dollars. So. And for me, the sign that the times are really changing was a manifestation on August 22nd, 2010. And this was a big rally to protect the Khimki forest in the Pushkin Square of Moscow. And it's been put together literally by three people, by Zhenya Chirikova, who is, a little woman and very normal housewife, who's been unlucky enough, to buy a flat just by the construction site of this highway, which ruins the Khimki forest, and she started to protest, and now she is one of the best-known civil activists in Russia. So it was her, it was Yuri Shevchuk, a leader of a rock band called DDT, arguably the most popular rock band in Moscow, and yours truly. I was kind of emceeing these manifestation. And when we came there, I thought there will be, as usual, on these distant meetings, maybe 100, 200 people. When we arrived there, found out that there were thousands. The whole Pushkin Square was full of people. Now, the police didn't let us to install the sound equipment. So all meeting, we've been crying out in megaphones. And literally nothing was heard like outside, maybe 50 meters from this little lorry from which we've been talking and singing and so on. But at the same time, I think the estimation was that there were between 7,000 and 8,000 people. All those thousands of people, they stood still for 3 hours, hearing next to nothing, but they all stood still there, very grateful. And it was tremendous, and it was very inspiring. And I remember that it was then that I cried to the crowd that this is the end of the bloody zeros. A new decade is starting, and the zeros was like the 70s in the Soviet Union, and now we are having a new decade, and it will be like the 80s. And of course, everyone remembers what the 80s were about. And it was really so, although it has taken a whole year before the civil movement, the protest movement started to take shape. I think the event that has triggered the mass protest was what we call rakirovочка. It's a chess expression, and I don't know the English word for it. But, if we forget about chess, it was on September 24th, 2011, when this guy said that now I will be the president and this other guy, now he will be the prime minister, that we have decided to swap our seats and you suck. And this was an insult. It was an absolute insult to millions of people in Russia, because they haven't been asked, they haven't been, anything. They just told them, okay, so now Putin again will be the president, and Medvedev, will take his place as a prime minister. So, the whole protest movement in Russia, and this is the principal and fundamental difference between this protest movement and what is happening in Arab countries or in Occupy Wall Street, is that it has no usual economic agenda. There were more than 100,000 of people at, say, the Sakharov Street or Bolotnaya Square last winter. And they were carrying many hundreds, if not thousands, of slogans. Among them, there wasn't a single one about economy, about unemployment, about wages, about losing job and so on, like it's happening in Spain, Italy, Greece, everywhere. Russian protest is about moral issues. It's about human dignity, first and foremost. And it was exactly the human dignity which has been trampled underfoot, by Putin, who said that, from now on I will be the president, and I don't care what you think about it. And I actually think that this was a mistake on his side, because, a lot of people, political scientists, journalists have considered what would happen if Medvedev would run for the second term as the president. And most do come to a conclusion, and I think I tend to agree with it, that there would most probably the things would be different then. Because I think that we've already got somewhat adjusted to Medvedev, and indeed he is younger and he is softer, and he was talking about modernization all the time, and there was a lot of people, especially in the business community, who thought that Medvedev will be okay. And literally, like a couple of weeks before this Congress of United Russia Party, where Putin announced that he will be the next president, Medvedev made a speech in Yaroslavl, my hometown, by the way, and he made a very nice speech about fighting corruption, about modernizing the country, about getting away from the addiction from oil and gas and so on. Oh yeah, I'm very sorry about that. Now I will be very quick because we have a little time left, and Sergei has suggested, and I fully agree that there must be some space for questions and answers. So anyway, okay, to hell with Medvedev. He's a complete wanker anyway. So let's go to important thing. You know what has happened. So what's happening now in Russia is what I described, and I'm very happy for inventing this term. I described it as a cold civil war, because the response of the authorities to the mass protest of the so-called creative class or middle class, call it anyhow, of the intelligent and educated people of Russia against the regime, has been absolutely dumb and negative. I mean, there could be several things. They could, accept the demands of the people and really try to fight the corruption, to go for honest and transparent elections, to reform the legal system, which is completely, I only know 4-letter words about it, which is completely faked up, let's put it this way. And they didn't do this. They could at least start a dialogue with the opposition, having some kind of trying to reach some kind of compromise. Again, there's absolutely no dialogue. So what's happening, what has followed, is just the tightening of the screws everywhere, and it's very violent. A policy of splitting the society, into the opposition and those who support Putin, and this is what I call the cold civil war. And apparently, Putin has found out that he has nothing to do with the democratic opposition. That this part of the people, this part of the Russian population is lost for him completely. And he decided, just to ignore them and just oppress them and nothing else. But at the same time, he applies for, the non-educated, we call it темные, the dark, the most conservative strata of the population. Of course, there's nothing new about it. Like George W. Bush also, I think, always told about a moral majority or something like that. But there is a big difference. I mean, the American moral majority, no matter how conservative it is, it still does share the basic values of human rights, freedoms, and democracy, more or less. In Russia, the Putin's majority is formed around several main, I would say, patterns of hatred. One is xenophobia. So we are Russians and we are against everyone else. You know, we are good, we are right, and they are all wrong. And of course, the leader of the wrong world is indeed the United States of America. Number two is Orthodox Christianity, you know, in the most kind of fundamentalist medieval way. Now the third main issue is homophobia. So, and the thesis is that, you know, all those who don't support Putin, they are gay atheists funded by Americans, period. And, you know, it does sound like a joke, but the awful truth is that this is true. And if you watch Russian TV in the past several months, this is exactly what they say all the time. And the state propaganda works very hard on creating on this. And I personally think that this is worse than Soviet communism. You know, I lived still, I'm 57, soon will be 58 now, and I lived most of my life in the Soviet Union. And I have no illusions about the Soviet Union, and I'm not nostalgic for the Soviet Union. But in the Soviet Union, you know, the ideology of the Soviet Union has been Marxism. Marxism, no matter, you know, whether it's you like it or not, but Marxism is a respectable and global philosophy, which has a lot of followers everywhere, lots of philosophers, intellectuals, and so on. Even if you don't agree with them, you know, you can't say that, you know, this is shit, this is nothing. Whereas, unlike Marxism, Putinism, yes, and also Marxism and the Soviet ideology has always dealt with the future. They always said about светлое будущее, you know, the bright future, future. Now, Putinism deals only with the past. Tomorrow is yesterday, or the day before yesterday. It's not global, it's very local. It's very local, it's not attractive to anyone except for a certain amount of millions of Russian idiots. It's very backwards. So if, okay, I do not believe this will succeed, and strategically I'm very optimistic. But what's happening in Russia now is, in my humble opinion, it's the worst period of the history of the country, of which I personally have been a witness. It's probably slightly better than Stalinism, but it's going fast in that very direction. So, thank you very much. Unfortunately, too little time, but if you have questions, please go ahead.
You mentioned that you considered the zeros a little bit like the 1970s, and I know from your book that you personally had actually quite some exciting 1970s. You were part of the sort of emerging hippie movement, part of the emerging rock music scene. Do you see something similar happening in the zeros as well? There was this sort of pre-run of the opposition. I mean, Pussy Riots, etc. didn't come.
Yes. In a way, of course, you know, as we say, спасибо Путину за это, thanks Putin to this. You know, the cultural scene is getting much livelier now. You know, the zeros has been a completely lost decade. Right now, of course, you know, inspired by the protest movement, we have plenty of new cultural developments in the country, and not everyone has sold out to the regime. So there's a lot of people, especially in music and literature, but even some in the theater, which is quite a new thing. And again, reminds, of the old Soviet times, when theater was in the forefront of the dissident cultural movement. So I think that it's only those areas of culture which demand big state subsidies, which stay aside of it, like the cinema.
Anyone else? Please.
I have two questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, my first question is about your concept of cold civil war. So you define it as a cold civil war, so you definitely have this, moral protest on one side and the dark masses on the other, and the moral process is totally about dignity and has no economic agenda, which I think is obvious to everybody. But don't you think it's its weakest side? How can you win a cold civil war if you can't appeal to majority of the population who might have peace?
Yes, well, it's a very good question, and this is what everyone in the Russian opposition is now talking about, because apparently, this huge part of the population, which Putin and his propaganda machine says that they support him, they actually don't support him. Because Russia is basically a very tremendously, fundamentally unhappy country right now. No one is happy. Everyone is frustrated, starting, from oligarchs, who are constantly robbed by the state, and finishing, with the working class who've got nothing to do but drink themselves to death. So even those who vote for Putin, they don't like him, and they said that we live in shit, and let alone they will never fight for him. I mean, I could go on barricades. I mean, I can take my fire thrower and go ahead. All those guys who vote for Putin, they will never raise their ass from their sofa and from their football game to do anything to save this regime. And of course a very important task for those who want changes and who want to make the country happier is to win those millions of people. And of course the only way to win them is to make their life better, and in order to make their life better, of course, the economic agenda is tremendously important. So now the opposition movement, they try to introduce some economic slogans which were completely absent before, but now they try to introduce it. I mean, in the political agenda and human rights agenda.
Yes, I had a second question about tightening of the screws. So since you're very close, as far as I understand, to all this milieu, how prominent is fear, especially in 2012 and 2013 with all the new laws? Do you think that people in the protest movement are getting scared?
Well, I think this is exactly what the authorities want to do. I mean, they want to to scare the shit out of people. They want them to to never go to manifestation, for journalists to never write anything against them. And they really, they implement this everywhere. I mean, they take totally innocent people and put them to jail just because they've been passing by a protest rally, or they ban and say they may jail internet bloggers, for saying some words of criticism against some local United Russia authority or something. I mean, they want to introduce this fear exactly in the totalitarian way. They want to introduce total fear, and this, this is news, because before it's been kind of more varied. I mean, the censorship only existed on TV, because say the internet was uncensored. The printed press was considered, too small by the authorities and only read, by eggheads. But now they want to control everything, and they want everyone, to be obedient. This really hasn't happened in Russia since the beginning of the 80s.
But are people scared of this?
I think quite a lot of people are scared, but they are scared and kind of sick and infuriated at the same time. So hence the fact that, well, as far as I know, millions of people, even according to official sociological polls, millions of people want to emigrate. No one wants to stay in Russia. This is like a sinking ship full of rats.
I feel like a rat now.
Anyone else? Please.
Is the FSB as strong as or as prominent as Stalin's NKVD?
Well, I think in Stalin's time, we've had the NKVD or ČK, and it was huge and strong and almighty. And now, of course, we have democracy and pluralism. So we have FSB, we have MVD, we have Следственный комитет, we have Prokuratura, and so on. So now we have a plenty of organizations, and they are all equally awful and vicious and all quite strong. So FSB is now lost among their awful colleagues.
I was listening to a radio interview recently by Mikhail Gorshevsky. Some things he says I agree with, some of them I do not, but he said something interesting during this interview. He said that now Putin's power rests on 4 whales. I don't remember what the first 3 whales were, but the 4th whale was the so-called unofficial opposition. And the justification of that is that right now...
Okay, so what you mean is that our opposition is so miserable and unpopular and ineffective that in reality it is one of the supporting pillars for Putin, right?
Well, not only in that sense. Right now the opposition give interviews. They have an audience to speak to. It's easy for them to criticize Putin. It's relatively easy to criticize. They have a comfortable job.
Okay. Anyway, well, I can tell you that I personally, I'm very sad and kind of disappointed with the performance of our opposition. And what else can I say? Maybe it's another luck of Putin, apart from oil prices and the fact that the West tends to turn blind eye on a new fascist regime fastly growing. I think that the opposition, has to be blamed for a lot of wrongdoings. I personally, I'm not a politician at all. I mean, I'm a journalist. I'm just I do not belong to any political party. And this is happening simply because, apart from a few really good people, I simply see no one in the opposition, I could, stand together with. So At the same time, I think that the criticism that opposition puts on Putin is absolutely just. So they are saying all the right things. The problem is that they are doing nothing.
I agree, but to what extent do you think they're interested in changing the regime? Because it's easy for them to do what they do now, but it will be harder to change the regime. So what interest are they actually interested in changing?
I think that we simply don't know what to do, and we don't really know how to change it. I mean, I personally am quite sure that it will end up in one of two things. Option number one is that there will be some kind of coup d'état, like the killing of Pavel I. Because a lot of people, even in the ruling elite, they've had enough of Putin. I mean, this guy is really crazy now. I mean, he's inadequate, and a lot of people understand that. Oligarchs, politicians, and so on. So I'm pretty sure that there is a growing opposition, just around the corner from Putin's bedroom. So this is one possibility. Another possibility is simply is terrorism. I mean, and this is something that Russia has some glorious traditions of. I mean, Народная воля and so on. Bombisты, those guys, because Putin has cut all the ways to change this system in a civilized, democratic way. There's no elections, there's no dialogue in this society. I mean, there's absolutely no goodwill. So what remains is violence.
What's to be done? Susan?
What is the situation with the military?
I don't know. Right now we have this turmoil in the Ministry of Defense. There used to be a Minister of Defense who was quite unpopular, and he's been sacked very recently. And now there's all kinds of investigations into all kinds of financial, fraud in the Ministry of Defense. Well, generally speaking, I think that the military, they don't really mean much in Russia, because the army is absolutely demoralized. I mean, the whole Russian army couldn't crack down on a tiny Chechnya. It's backwards, it's demoralized, it's partly drunk, partly junky, and it's it's just they still have nuclear warheads, and of course that's weird. I mean, because what they now deserve is some kind of 19th century cavalry.
So you said you have more of a positive outlook on the future. You don't think Putin's regime can survive, and you also mentioned the Sochi Olympics. So do you think the Olympics are going to cast more of a forgiving light on Russia when it's in the world stage, almost like it did with China, kind of overlooking their human rights violations? Or do you think the attention on Russia is going to be much more critical and drive the regime?
Okay. A good question. Hopefully the last one, but very important. And this is a question of what the international community, what this community's role might be. Well, if we talk about Sochi Olympics, I think they should be boycotted, because it's the dirtiest kind of theft and environmental catastrophe, and I mean, it's awful. It's simply awful. I think there's absolutely no moral ground to not boycott those Olympic Games. Now, if we talk generally, and I have, and particularly about the role of the United States in it, I was always fancying the Democrats, because I always liked JFK, and I have two major childhood memories from 61 and 63. 61 was actually my earliest, brightest childhood memory. It was April 22nd when Gagarin flew to space. You know, I remember this day very well. You know, and it was very sunny and very happy. And my second childhood memory from 63 was, you know, when I heard the news of JFK assassinated. You know, it was like, you know, the first, you know, really sad day of my life. So since then, I kind of like the Democrats and so on. But I can tell you that considering the policy towards Russia, by far the most effective American president has been Ronald Reagan. I have no idea about what is done to America itself, you know, Reaganomics, you know, this and that. Maybe he was awful at some other things. But he was absolutely brilliant at destroying the Soviet Union. And I think that it's exactly this way. I mean, no compromise at all. Evil empire, period. You know, this is how it should be done.
On this note,
Спасибо. Thank you.